Hi folks, Jean here, and welcome to this month's episode of Have You Ever Read? Firstly, let me apologise, it's late this month because I haven't been well, so sorry about that. So it's taken me a while to kind of catch up in terms of reading the book and then also recording it. But hey, I'm here and I wanted to get an episode to you this month for September because I made a vow. I don't want to say vow, that's a strong word, but I made a commitment to myself that I would get out a podcast episode about a book every month. And I'm currently reading Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Successful Leaders. I forgot the title, but you know that book, the classic book. Anyway, I'm reading that, and that's one of the books I'm reading, as you will find out in this episode. I'm reading that, and one of the things that he mentions, actually the first or the most important habit, is to keep your commitments to yourself, the commitments you make to yourself. And I thought that was an interesting point. I'm going off on a tangent, but yeah, I thought that was interesting because I'm sure we all try to follow the let your yes be yes and your no be no. We usually do that in relation to other people and not necessarily to ourselves. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting read. Anyway, going off the point. So what are we talking about this month? We are talking about, well, actually, let me first say it's an episode where it's just me. Sorry about that. Or no, not sorry. I shouldn't apologize. Yeah, it's an episode when it's just me. And we are talking about the six seasons of Calling by Brian Sanders. So why am I reading this book? So I said so twice now. I bought this book during the pandemic. I bought a number of books during the pandemic, but this is one of those books that I bought during the pandemic and it's just been sitting on my shelf wondering when am I going to read it, but it hasn't really felt relevant. And I pulled it off my shelf. I think I'd started it briefly during the pandemic, but it wasn't relevant. So I moved on from it. But at this point in my life, I'm going through a transitional period. And so I thought, okay, let me read this book. So I picked it up and I gave it a read. And I think it's really helped me during this period. And I will explain why. I think my main takeaway from the book has been, maybe there are many of you who are in a similar boat to me who are millennials and you're at this point in your life where you're like, what's next, God? I'm not too sure. I'm not young anymore in a certain way. I'm still young, but I'm not as young as I was. So I'm not starting out in my career, but I'm not old and in a place where I feel stable, or older, I should say, not old. And so it's like, what next? So that's why I read this book. And I think this book, in reading it, gave me an answer to my question and actually confirmed that I was on the right path and was doing the right things, because it basically explained what people in my age range should be doing. And in a sense, I am doing that. So for me, this book was more of a confirmation of where I am in life and how I ought to pursue my next step. So maybe, as I usually do, outline what the book is and what the main details are. So the book is basically explaining, as I said, the different stages that we have in life if we live to like 70 years old or 72 plus. And the aim, I would say, is to kind of provide a framework of life. So the book is divided into 2 sections. The first section outlines that people have been coming up with, that sociologists have been coming up with different frameworks about aging and transitional periods. And I think what Brian is saying is his work fits or sits in that body of work, as it were. But he's keen to say as well in the opening section that calling is dynamic. So I should say he's linking our aging, as it were, to different aspects of calling in our lives. So in a sense, we have multiple callings based on where you are on the age range. I hope that makes sense. So calling is dynamic is one of the things he's keen to make to explain at the beginning. So that means it's always changing. So as you probably know, what the Lord may call you to do in one season is what he may not call you to do later, or he may give you a vision like he did to Joseph when you're younger, and you may try to pursue it very early, but actually is for a future calling. So he's saying that. And then 2, he wants to make the point that we shouldn't see these age boundaries that he's laid out as exact. So you may find when you read the book or when I go through them that actually you're in either the lower or upper stage that is different to the age that you actually are. So, for example, perhaps you're 25, which I think is the early career stage, but actually you might find that your life is more around adolescence for whatever reason. Maybe you're still at university and you're perhaps doing a PhD or something, and so your adolescence or formative stage for your next part of your career may not have begun your early career, as it were. But again, that all depends on how you define early career, because again, you could be on a PhD program and actually have started your early career, because maybe you're going to be an academic and you have started, I don't know, well, you would have started teaching undergrads. So that's all to say that this is supposed to be a guideline rather than definitive. So that's the first section of the book. And I think here as well, I learned something that I had never considered before. He explains that a lot of the time, and I feel actually probably I should have started with this. This might be the greatest takeaway from the book for me. A lot of the time when we are going through transitions in our lives, they are usually driven by identity crises, and they can come in many different forms, as in sickness or death or grief or a loss of a job or divorce, anything really. Like he really makes a point that one of the things that we should be mindful of is that when we're transitioning, we often have this identity crisis moment, and unfortunately for many of us, including myself, we don't realize that is actually God calling us back to be with him, and that we're supposed to see, he actually has this cycle. Let me turn to it before I get it wrong. We're supposed to see these identity crises as an opportunity to become intimate with God. And then when we are intimate with God, it's at that place in his presence that our identity is reaffirmed. Oh, that's not helpful, is it? Our identity is... that was my battery, sorry. My battery. It was my speaker telling me the battery is low. Anyway, it's an opportunity for us to go back to the presence of God and have our identity reconfirmed to us. And we are supposed to be reassured of the love of God and then move out into our new purpose and mission and calling, and walking that, having had that time of intimacy with the Lord. And I felt that cycle was really helpful, actually. And looking back on times in my life when there has been this transitional period or a period of lulling, nothingness. I mean, I would deem it as nothingness, but obviously in my life, God is always doing things. But you know how we are. We always dismiss these things or compare ourselves to another person and say, why, Lord, all of that jazz. So I just found that really helpful. As I said, as I've looked back, I found that, yeah, that's true, actually. Those times when it's felt like nothing was happening, it was an opportunity for me to return to the presence of God and to become more sure in my relationship with him and in my identity in Christ. And also it gave me an ability, a newness, a refreshingness and determination to kind of move into the next phase of my life. So that was huge for me, actually. And as I said, because I'm in that transitional period, I felt it really resonated with me. So yeah, that was that. Now, turning back to the structure. So we've done part 1. Part 2 then goes into what he calls our 6 days of calling. Now, the 7th day and the 6 days, from what I understand, is based on the creation narrative. So he's saying we have these different stages in life, and then they are aligning with the 6 days that God created the earth in. And then day 7, when God rested, is obviously for us. Well, it's not obvious, but day 7 for us will be death. So That's the structure. So he goes through each of these different stages, or days, I should say, and then in between the days, he has an interlude. And I kind of read these interludes as almost like key takeaways that are relevant for the different stages or all stages. So, for example, one of the interludes is called Process and Planning. Or is it Process and Planning? Let me just check. Process and Progress, sorry. And in that chapter, what he's trying to say, and they're short, very short chapters, like 2 pages. What he's basically saying in this Process and Progress is it isn't that you move from, say, childhood to adolescence and you just move on. Well, no, you take the learnings from childhood into adolescence. And I think many times we neglect those learnings and we just say, I'm in a new stage, so I shouldn't behave like that. So, for example, if we're going into childhood, he says one of the key points of childhood, he frames it as a ideal development condition, is to learn how to play. And he makes the point that playing is the only thing that brings pure pleasure or joy. Now, that doesn't mean that you're supposed to play for the rest of your life every single day. But his point is play is something that we're supposed to continually do. It's not something that I'm supposed to stop doing when I'm an adult. I'm supposed to take it into the rest of my life as a learning, as a key point of development. So it's the process of moving through the ages and progressing. So adding new tools to my toolkit, as it were. So I hope that makes sense. So let me go back and maybe outline what the different stages or days are. So you have childhood, and in childhood, you are usually between, it's day 1 and you're 0 to 12. He has these, what he calls core development concept, ideal development concept, and primary development threat, and then what you're calling an identity is. I hope that makes sense. So in the childhood, you're calling an identity is you're a child. And as I said, your ideal development condition is you're learning how to play. But then your core development concept is you're learning how to bond. And then he talks about the primary threat to that stage. So in the case of childhood, it would be fear and isolation. And he makes the point that actually for children who haven't experienced the opportunity to bond with their parents, their siblings, their friends, so maybe, for example, they were abandoned at a young age, or they were suddenly orphaned, or they didn't grow up in a family where they received the relevant or right care and love. His point is, in those situations, they may lack the bonding. They may not learn about bonding in the appropriate or correct way, and then they may begin to have fear and isolation or want to separate themselves from the rest of the world. That's the primary development threat, right? So you're supposed to be bonding, but actually your circumstances mean that you don't develop that, and then there's a risk that you might become isolated and have fear, right? Which you would then take on into the rest of your life. And I forgot to mention that in the progress and process chapter, I think it's there, his point is that some of these things that he's identified as good, like the bonded, for example, or play, if you don't happen to, because of your circumstances, because of how life is, you don't happen to receive them, it doesn't mean you can't get them later on in life. And I think one of the things that I took away is, as Christians, there's always hope, right? There's always restoration. There's always an opportunity to go back and to figure out, okay, did I not learn this at this particular stage? And if not, how can I figure out how to acquire it? So that's also helpful. So the second stage is adolescence, which is 12 to 24. Then you have early career, which is 24 to 36, mid-career. And then at adolescence, you're a student. So you're supposed to be learning and developing agency, but then there's also the risk that as you're learning and developing agency, instead of looking, as your knowledge grows, instead of looking outwards, you begin to look inwards and think you know it all. And he goes through some steps to kind of help pre-teens overcome that and to focus on learning primarily from Jesus Christ, but then also from the world around them. I wouldn't say he goes through steps. That's a bit of a strong... he doesn't use steps. He gives some guidance about how parents can parent preteens who are at this stage where they think they know best. Yeah, so then, as I said, early career, 24 to 36. And in that stage, you're basically a worker. So you've moved on from... Well, it's not that you moved on, because you're still, as I said, you each of these stages you're supposed to build on top. So you're still learning. Everybody's supposed to be learning throughout their life. But now you're actually doing stuff. You're an apprentice, as it were, learning the trade, serving. And as you're serving, you're supposed to get challenge. So you improve by the challenge. And I think I remember when I was through this stage, one of the problems I had is I was serving and I felt that I wasn't challenged. And this book really explained to me why I kind of felt unhappy. Is that the word? Or yeah, let me use the word unhappy, because I can't think of a better word at the moment. Like, there was this tension that, okay, I'm serving, but I don't feel like I'm being stimulated or challenged. And I think that's something to bear in mind for those of us who are apprenticing or teaching or leading people who are early career. That is 24 to 36. It's not just a case of getting them to work, but actually, is the work challenging and fulfilling to them? And the temptation for people in that age group is what they become as they develop and learn and are challenged and are moving up, getting more knowledge, almost the same knowledge, as it were, what they think or we think, as the person that's teaching them. There's the temptation to become entitled and impatient. And I'm definitely sure that was true of me. That it's almost like, I've been here for a while now, what next? And why aren't I being promoted? That kind of stuff. This isn't worth my time. So those are the real dangers, I guess, for people who are what they call zillennials. So millennials, younger than a traditional millennial, but then not quite Gen Z. So, or older than Gen Z, yeah. So zillennials. And then you have mid-career. And in the mid-career, your core development concept is creating. And you want impact. You're a maker. And so this is what I think. So I'm an older millennial, so I'll fit into this bracket of wanting to leave the world better than I found it. And so in this stage, you are supposed to be thinking about, how can I create? How can I add value? And I think if you're in this age group and you find yourself in a role or a job or in a position in your church where you don't feel like you're making much progress, perhaps you need to consider, how can I create something? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be in your workplace, right? You can find it outside of work, outside of church. But I think, and I agree with this, that there is a particular point in life, mid-career, where we begin to ask ourselves, what impact am I making on the world? So how am I phrase it like this, if I'm thinking about the theologies, how am I joining or partnering with God to bring heaven on earth? And I think for me, having that at the forefront of my mind has been helpful. And so I would encourage people to think about that. Like, where are you in that? And sometimes we live in a world that's driven by social media, which makes us think that we have to be impacting so many people for it to actually have real impact. But that isn't true. I'm sure most of us actually know that it's not true. So even if it's small impact, how and where can I add value by creating and to make the world a little bit different, a little bit better than it was yesterday or the day before? But then for us, our primary development threat is greed, obviously. I mean, yeah, we would just want more and more and more, especially if you're financially stable, right? There's a temptation, I think, to figure out, and especially if you're very intelligent, very smart, there's a temptation to want to manipulate and take advantage of those who you perceive to be less than you, and to acquire more, to have more fame, to get more followers, to have more money, to literally say you're the best. So that was really helpful to me. And then later in the career, you have, if you're 48 to 60, your core you're a mentor at this stage, and you're supposed to be into giving and scaling what you've built when you were younger. And I think he mentions that your primary threat would be a distraction. And then the last stage, day 6, is when you're transitioning. And when you're thinking about transition here, I think he's talking about transition to death. So yeah, I don't know if I really like that expression, but that's what it is. And at this point, you're supposed to be thinking about finishing, celebrating what how the Lord has used you to impact the world, and mentor other people to scale what you've built. But then there's a temptation here for you to feel like you're no longer relevant and you're obscure. And also, not just, I don't think with this one, it's just mental. I actually think there is some truth in the way society, and this is a challenge for us in the church, to move away from idealizing youth, because this group of people, 60 to 72 or 60 plus basically, are often, it's almost like you finished your race, right? So hand over the baton and job done. Or you're sometimes, for practical reasons, you're in a nursing home and people aren't really seeing you or visiting you, and you feel like you're no longer relevant. Technology's moving on. I don't know how to keep up with it. So that's a challenge for the person, both internally, and then also a call for us externally to figure out how we can re-engage people and not make them feel obscure, and that they're still relevant and needed to those of us who are younger. So those are the different days. I hope that made sense. It's a lot more detailed than I thought I was going to go into. But yeah, I think I want to say, and he calls those people mystics, sorry. But I want to say one of the things that he brought up in the book that I thought was really interesting and I hadn't reflected on was the fact that their primary aim, as he said, is for them to finish. And he makes the point of them finishing well. In a sense, you want to get that well done, thou good and faithful servant from Christ. And he cites some research that says that actually Christian youth leaders, I'll read it. It says, it's by a gentleman called Robert Clinton. And he argues that 2 out of 3 Christian leaders don't finish well. And that really made me think and reflect. Reasons why Brian Sanders that thinks that people don't finish well is partly because we put too much pressure on Christian leaders. And 2, we don't really understand it takes effort to actually finish well. It takes effort to pay attention to your character, to continuously want to be someone who's learning from others around you, to hold on to your convictions that you felt when you were younger, to not get distracted, and to be aware of the influence of the culture and the world. And also to, most importantly, I would say, focus on the relationship that you once had with God, or to continually ensure that that relationship is flourishing. And so that was a warning to me that, you know, I can be doing this podcast now, but the question is, like, in 30, 40, 50 years, will I still be interested in, maybe I won't be running this podcast, but will I still be faithful to it, to the vision or whatever it is that God's called me, but then also to my relationship with him? And I think that's something that for those of us who are younger, if we maybe have that at the forefront of our mind, how am I going to finish? Am I going to finish well? That may impact some of our decisions and what we get ourselves involved in. Yeah, so that was an interesting point for me. I'm just trying to see, is there anything else I wanted to bring up? Oh yes, in one of the sections, the interludes, he brings up this prayer by Ignatius, and it's really interesting to me because I had never thought about this before. And his point is, look, that Ignatius had this prayer of indifference. So the prayer of indifference is, I am indifferent, like basically, Lord, make me indifferent to anything that isn't your will. If you reflect on what that means, that's very serious. And I never really thought of it in those terms, in those ways. You know, I pray for the will of God to be done, but I don't think I'm indifferent to my own will. I don't think I'm indifferent to the culture. I don't think I'm indifferent to my peers and comparing myself one to another. So I have, as it were, all these voices that when the Lord speaks, and I'm actually basically saying what he said in the book, that when the Lord speaks to me about my calling and what he feels is my will, or what he's communicating is my will, sadly, I have all these different voices that are influencing me, which I'm not indifferent to. And that really made me reflect on how I pray about the will of God and my response to it, even in the small things, like the time I should record this podcast, say, for example. I may get the conviction, okay, record it now. But then I start thinking about other things, you know. I need to go downstairs and eat. I need to empty the washing machine or the dishwasher. So it's interesting to me that I can see the will of God, but then I'm not indifferent to the small voices. I hope that makes sense. And it's been really interesting for me. And he said, so the point of the prayer of indifference isn't that I'm trying to strain to hear the will of God or to hear God speak, because we all know God is always speaking. The problem is not God isn't speaking. The problem is me, the receiver. So the prayer of indifference is about silencing those voices. So positioning myself to hear from God directly. And it's not straining to hear him. So it's not, can you speak a little bit louder, God? Can you speak a little bit louder? Because he is speaking and the volume is constant. However, I've also turned up, or I'm responding to the other voices at the same time. That was very interesting to me, and it's a different perspective altogether. So yeah, that was a thought that I thought was worth sharing. I'm just looking, is there anything else I want to tell you? Well, basically, you need to just read the book. With all these things, you just read the book. I found it was quite insightful, and yeah, those are the main points that I wanted to share in terms of what I took away from it. Where there might be challenge. So I said it a bit earlier. This book is a framework. And the last day, he puts it as 60 to 72 plus, right? And as I said at the beginning, he did say that calling is dynamic. And so you may not fit into these things, these boundaries automatically, right? So be mindful of that. Your life is different. Everybody's life is different. We're all, oh yeah, he has this really unique, oh yeah, I forgot to say that. He said this thing that was really good. We are all trying to hear from God, and we're all trying to make our impact in this world. So we all have a calling, but our calling is, actually, let me find it. Oh, I can't find it. Oh, we said a lot, in this first chapter. I think you should definitely review it. Calling is dynamic because God is dynamic, and your relationship with God is dynamic. But calling also requires fidelity to a course of action because God gives assignments that require persevering obedience. That's not what I wanted to tell you, but that's also a winner. Yeah, this is something I did want to tell you. I'm sorry, I can't find that quote about the uniqueness of our calling, but we're all the same. What he said that was really, really helpful to me as well. He made this point, and it's happened to me so many times. Or as I was reflecting and reading, maybe they came to mind and I didn't think about it then before. Calling, as he said, is about different seasons at different times. And he said that sometimes in these identity crises, what happens? Step back. What he said is one of the signs that something is a calling is that it comes back in a different form. And it's usually not that you have planned for it to happen. And he said that usually the door opens for this thing that you had in your mind 10 years ago, 20 years ago, following an identity crisis. So I'll give an example. When I graduated from university, one of the first things I was doing was I was writing for like small political blogs. Nobody was really reading them. I remember I sent them around to a few of my friends and nothing much came of it, right? And I did that because I was just trying. I knew I wanted to do writing, but I didn't know how to get in. I didn't have any connections into journalism. I didn't have any people that I knew. So I was just writing for small, insignificant blogs here, there, and everywhere. I think I got a bit discouraged because maybe I did it 2 or 3, maybe 4 times. And then either I stopped or I got another job, a job. So that ended. Fast forward to now, I've been doing my devotional for the past 3 years. By God's grace, it's grown to like 4,000 readers. But then also, 2025, this has been the year that I've actually started writing for major publications. To be honest, I totally forgot about the fact that I had been doing it, trying to be a writer in the early days. I had self-published 2 books or 3 books during the pandemic. But it's one of these things that keeps coming up randomly. So I did the blog when I was younger, I self-published during the pandemic. I felt, okay, nothing much has come of these books. But then now, 5 years later, actually getting opportunities with major publications. And so the point is, one of the signs that it's a calling or an assignment from God is it comes up, it repeats itself in your life, even if you don't see this. Even if, like, I wouldn't say that I've been writing, like some people, they've been writing since they graduated. They're journalists, full-blown journalists. That's been their thing. And you can say that's a calling. But then for me, it's been this in, out sort of thing. And he's saying that that's a sign that something is a calling. So yeah, that was good. So going back to the challenge, because I've gone off topic. I didn't realize this was going to be this long. I didn't realize I had this much to say about this book. Anyway, the challenge, I would say, what I was saying to you earlier, is he stops at 72, but then we actually know of people who live longer than that. And as medicine is improving and life expectancy is increasing around the world, this doesn't necessarily fit, right? So if you think about someone like David Attenborough, he's still 90, pushing 90, maybe going up towards 95, and he's actively working. And there are loads of people like that. Or you think about people who start second careers in their 70s. Or you can think of somebody like Prince Charles, who is now King Charles. He came to the throne, honestly, the most important part of his calling / life, I mean, from those of us outside looking in, started when he was 74 years old. So what I would say in terms of the critique of this book is it made me realize that there's a difference between doctrine and theory. So even though he's structured this around Genesis and the creation narratives, this book, or the ideas in this book, I wouldn't class them as, and I don't think he would either. They shouldn't be read or understood as doctrine. Like, this is what the Bible is saying about aging, or this is a framework, or it's not rigid. This is more a theory. And if I'm thinking about it from broadly trying to think about how science describes theories, it's almost like this book should be read as somebody seeing how the world exists and trying to make sense of it and writing it down in a book to give us guidance. So just take it like that, rather than this is a doctrine. It's more like guidance of what has been observed. I hope that makes sense. So that would be my critique, because it doesn't fully capture everyone. Even though, as I said, he does make it clear that everybody's calling is unique, and so this won't align for everybody. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this book. But it's a good book. The 6 Seasons of Calling. As ever, I will put it in the show notes, the links to the book. Get the book. And really, I would say, as I said, it's guidance, but it's really helped me understand where I am in life. And it's helped me understand some of the questions I've had about my calling and direction. And it's given me hope for the next phase and season for my life. And I would encourage you to read it. Yeah, so I would also want to say that because this is now going out towards the end of September, I think the next episode will be up mid-October, at least, so you get an opportunity to read the book. And then we'll go back to the first Wednesday of the month in November. So thanks for your time. If you've liked this episode, please rate and review it wherever you listen to podcasts, because it really helps the algorithms get the podcast into the hands of other listeners. But I want to take this opportunity to say thanks for listening. As ever, I will be back, God willing, next month in your ears. And until then, keep reading and seeking and serving the Lord. God bless. Bye.